Good evening, everyone. My name is Brandon Norris, and I wanted to spend a few minutes this evening talking to you guys about creating an inclusive CTE classroom. You'll have to excuse me, I got a little bit of a cold this evening, so I'm going to try to speak as clearly and as professionally as possible. I may get a little stuffy. The first thing I wanted to ask you guys is, what do you think an inclusive classroom is? I'll give you a few moments to think about it, and then at the end of the presentation, maybe you can give me your ideas on it. Okay, what I think creating an inclusive classroom is, what it does is ensure that all of our students are successful from all special populations, whether they're minorities, special needs, our academically gifted students, our advanced learners, those with a different native language, maybe English language is their second language. So what we need to do is ensure that all of these students have the best chance at being successful. The next thing I want to talk about is federal legislation. There have been a lot of federal acts passed to try to get education to the forefront, and a lot of these have to do with addressing all student needs. And I'll name a few that I've got listed here. You have the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Education Amendments of 1972, No Child Left Behind, Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, the Rehabilitation Act, Every Student Succeeds Act, Workforce Investment Act, and of course we all know the Carl D. Perkins Act, which has been revised multiple times, and as time goes on, it becomes more and more inclusive for all students. The next thing I want to address, and you can give me your input at the end of this as well, is, what is our obligation as teachers for these students? Well, I come up with three things that we are obligated to do. We have a moral duty, a civic duty, and it's our professional duty to take care of all of these students. All of these students need to be as independent as possible when they graduate high school and have the skills necessary to be a successful contributing member to society. Next question. How does CTE benefit special populations? Well, it's proven that it does help having these kids in a CTE classroom. Having special populations in a CTE classroom makes for more success in general education. These students are more productive when they get into the other classrooms. They make higher grades. They have the chance for higher wages. They have a higher rate of employment. It helps them develop problem-solving skills. They learn better communication skills because we work in teams most of the time when we're in a CTE classroom. We share ideas, bounce them off each other, and most importantly, I think, is the fact that they learn practical skills. They learn the soft skills of how to be a successful employee, and then they learn the technical skills that they're going to use out in the real world. And I think that's a very important thing for those students, because we want them to be as independent as possible. It doesn't just involve our special needs students, but it involves all the special populations. The next question, what do instructors need? We need complete collaboration from all other educators in the school to make sure we take care of these students' needs. Everyone needs support from the administration. If the administration is not on board, then it's going to become an obstacle to get these kids the resources they need. As CTE teachers, we need their student information and their profiles. We need to know what kind of student we have, the best way to teach them. How do they learn? Is kinesthetic, verbal? Can they read it? How do they learn? What are their obstacles? The next thing that we need to address is resources and training. This is kind of hard because there's not a lot of funds out there for specialized training. We would have to go on our own and take professional development courses specifically for special populations. It would take outside training that the school may or may not pay for, but it's our duty to make sure we take care of them. Like I said before, we have an obligation, and that's something we need to worry about. The last thing is we need to have copies of all of their achievements, their individualized education plans, and their 504 plans. We need to know what we're dealing with these students and what we can do to make sure, as I said before, they're as successful as possible. Some of them need special assistance. Some of them need help with the language barrier. And then there's some students, we need to challenge them more. There's not enough for them, and they may get bored in our class. So we have to find something, to get them more involved and make sure they stay focused and on task. We don't want the work to be too easy for them. The next thing is, what are special populations? There are many types of special populations. I happen to work with a few of these at the moment, so I have an understanding of what we're dealing with and how to approach this. First off, you have behavioral needs. These students may have oppositional defiance disorder. They may be on autism spectrum. They may just not had coping strategies growing up. There's a lot of things that can go on with those. Then we have the at-risk students. These are the students that are on the verge of dropping out. They have trouble in class. They may miss too much class. They're in detention. This might even tie into their behavioral needs. Then there are the special education students. There are 13 different categories. I won't go into detail about those, but we've all seen students that come from the special education department. Maybe they can't see, or they can't hear, they can't talk, they have specific ways of learning. They're just, different things. And then we have the English as second language. I currently know of 2 students that are in our school right now that do not speak English, but we still have to teach them and make sure they are learning in the classroom. I'll go over some strategies we do with that a little bit later on. The next group of students is our advanced learners, the high achievers. These are the kids that takes honor courses. They're in AIG, academically and intellectually gifted. These kids need to be pushed harder than the rest because some of this stuff comes a lot easier, and it's hard to balance. You have to use your different learning styles and strategies to teach these kids. Then we have our minority groups and the disadvantaged. Now, when I speak of disadvantage, I'm talking, social, economical. Maybe kids are neglected at home. They come into school, there's not much motivation. We have to go the extra mile to take care of those kids. Finally, we're going to talk about the strategies for creating an inclusive CTE classroom. Guys, I could list 50 different ways to do this. I picked the best ones I could find and the things that I think work from being an assistant teacher in the public school system, especially working with special needs. There are other ways. These are the ones I came up with and the ones I thought were probably the best. The first one is that you could have a special education teacher co-teach the classroom. How budgets are running stuff, this is probably a little impractical, but I think it's a good idea. You have the teacher during their planning period go with the other students to that classroom, because a lot of times teachers will have their planning during these exploratory style classes. Maybe you could get one that'll come and sit in and assist your student. The next thing is we need to modify. If a student has a problem learning one way, then we modify it to make sure they learn in another way. The next thing is accommodations. Does that student need to have something read aloud to him? Do we need to accommodate the noise in the classroom? What are the accommodations we need to come up with to make sure? Next thing is we as teachers need to make adaptations to our classroom. If one style does not work, we need to get back in there and redo how things are done. The next thing works great with 504 plans and English language learners, and that's the use of graphic organizers. You have the kids create foldables or whatever your preference is. They can draw pictures, just any type of visual with the word connected to it, and the kids can carry that around or even use it during assignments and tests, depending on what the 504 IEP, says. You can do a strategy such as pre-teaching, and pre-teaching is where you will get those students to the side that have the special needs or that are in the special population, and you sort of lay the groundwork for them. Then you go on to the class and you teach the whole class what you're going to go over that day, and those students already have an idea of what you're going to talk about. And I think I'd mentioned this before. Present your information in multiple ways. Don't just write it on the board. You can give handouts. You can pull it up on the internet in song form. You can give visual images. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Another strategy is to use check sheets and rubrics. Daily check sheets are a great way to make sure some of these students are staying on task and doing what they need, and to make sure they do not get behind or they do not understand particular concepts. If they have the check sheet and they carry it every day with them, you're going to ensure that they know what they need to know. And just same way with the rubric. Excuse me. The rubric will tell the students what you're looking for, and that'll remind the student each time they lose their train of thought or they get behind on something, they'll be able to refer to that rubric and see what the teacher's asked. Another strategy, I think this is great, and this works in one of the classrooms I work in, is peer support. Just having students who are understanding and who are willing to help those that either get a little behind or a little ahead. This is great for those honor students, those AIG students, the ones that can be leaders. What we do is have that particular student go with the special population, that or special needs student, or say the student that doesn't speak a lot of English. You have someone that is bilingual who is academically gifted, and you pair those students up, and that helps both students. The student learns by teaching, and the other student learns by having assistance. This is sort of something in the next two that I talked about, and that's the student-led and the cooperative learning. The next thing is to present contracts and pledges. I actually do this with my wrestling team. This has a list of ideas that I have, and they have to adhere to it. If it says you must whatever, you sign that pledge and you promise to do your best and to stick to what you're doing. And like I said, this will work well to keep students on task because they know what is asked of them. Another one is to modify your workspaces and make sure everything is accessible to each student. Some classrooms need to have space for a child to get in and out with a wheelchair or some type of other assistance. Say you have a child who has a walker. We need to make sure our classroom is set up in a manner that those students can get around the classroom without any issues. If the child has a wheelchair, you need a ramp. You need extra space in the doorway. Their workstation needs to be open and easy to get in and out in case of a fire drill or if something goes wrong in the shop. It just works better if we modify for all students. Another strategy is to create that student profile I talked about and make sure you know of the IEP and the 504 plans. And like I had mentioned before, we need to collaborate with other instructors, and have support from administration. I had mentioned this earlier with the check sheets, is you can also do a performance sheet, and that'll inform the student of how they've done each day and make sure they're getting what they need. One thing the next thing on this list that I use in the classroom, I have a student with behavioral issues, is I offer incentives to learn. He earns rewards daily. He knows that there are good consequences, but there can be bad consequences. But instead of, coming out and saying no, you have to walk around some of that, and you can't go straight to him and tell him no. So what we do is offer incentives. He may get a little bit of free time. He may get to get on a Chromebook during lunch. These are great to keep students motivated. I would maybe not incentives to learn, but motivations to learn possibly. Another strategy I use with him is giving instructional breaks. If something is too difficult and he needs a little bit of time, I let him step away. I don't want him frustrated because he could blow up, and that just disrupts the entire class and it interrupts the other student learning. So what we can offer in an inclusive classroom is an instructional break. You give the students 5 minutes to walk outside, walk down the hall, go get some water, go to the bathroom. Sometimes this even works for those students that have sleeping problems. We have some students that are on medication. They don't sleep well. They get to school and they're medicated, and it's impossible for them to hold their eyes open. So what we do is offer breaks, and then they can come back in if they would like. You remove the chair. They can stand up and do their work. Just try to make sure they're learning as they go through the day. Another thing we use is the use of translation books and Google Translate. I know of 2 students, one being on my wrestling team, who do not speak English, and it's difficult to bridge that translation gap when I don't speak Spanish and he doesn't speak English. A great thing I do is carry around my phone or even on the Chromebook and use Google Translate. I can type something in, click the button, hand it over to him, and he kind of gets it. One other strategy that I'd mentioned before too is there are bilingual students, and I will have those students pair up in class, or even like I said on the wrestling team, I will give instruction and then have that student translate to the other student, and I'm able to teach what I need to. The next thing on the list is the use of technological aids. This works great with students who are unable to talk, or students who are hard of hearing, or blind, students who have physical needs. Tablets work really well for this. If you have a student who can't speak but understands, you can get programs on your tablets, and the county will actually pay for it if it's in their IEP, and it'll have images. You can ask the student a question. They can click the image. It'll blow the image up, or it'll actually say the word for them. Say a student is in a particular mood that day. You ask him, how do you feel? That student can click on it and let you know, or you just design your own profile on the tablet and list everything that you need for that student. Then you have the other end of the spectrum. You have those students who are AIG and in honors. These students require higher demands and added work. What you can do is give them specialized assignments and have them work a little bit extra so they stay on top. You have to explain to them that it's not punishment, that it's just a way for them to make sure they're getting everything they can out of their education. These students could be shop assistants. They can be classroom assistants. In a CTE classroom, some of the best and brightest, those become the shop assistant. Those are your trustee types. Something needs to be done and they're finished with their work, you can trust them to go, say, clean the press or break down a machine, or you just have higher demands for them. A certain part of the class has this, this, and this. Will you add 2 more tasks to theirs? You don't want to overwhelm them, but you can add a little bit to it to help them out, to make sure they get the best. Another one I mentioned, you can give them special projects. If they finish up early, you give them a semester-long project. Not to say this is just added busy work or it's a punishment. You just make sure they're getting what they need and they're not being bored and they're not just skating by. You want that student to learn as much as possible, because more than likely those students will be able to go on to college, and you want to make sure they're prepared for that workload. And I'd already mentioned this one before too, and it was the differentiated learning, because there's different types of students in every classroom. And the last thing, we will review some references. Some of these are pretty good. If you ever get time, you can check those out. I like this one right here, University of Kansas, Resources for Inclusive Teaching. And as I'd mentioned before, you have the Department of Education Laws and Guidance. That has a ton of information on the legislation that's been passed for education. Thank you. If you have any questions, please let me know.